Hello.
Hello, Paul.
You got me?
I got you.
Can you explain before we start, can you tell me what my summer lair refers to?
Yes. You know how James Bond villains are like Scorpio
I get
on The
it.
Simpsons?
Yeah. Okay, lair. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have like an evil lair. So it's just like a
Like
summer
Edna
home.
Mode in The Incredibles. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a summer home where they can still like be evil. It was a dumb joke, but it was...
Well, we all have our thing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you run the show from here on in. That was just my only question.
Okay. That was an easy one, yeah. You're going to do the heavy lifting anyways. I'm the straight man on this one.
Yeah,
so.
and there's no math questions, right? Just so I know.
No. We're both
I had to go
in the
into
arts.
summer school, which summer school was my summer lair.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yes, and welcome to my summer lair. I'm your host, Sammy. Having Canadian bacon for breakfast makes me delirious. Yunnan. John Candy. What do you picture when I say those two words? John Candy passed away on March 4, 1994. So it's the ideal time to revisit his legacy and his comedic and cultural contributions. Paul Myers has written a fantastic Candy biography. The back of the book reads, in part, John Candy, A Life in Comedy, celebrates the comedian's talent, infectious charm, and generosity of spirit. Indeed, Paul's compelling bio, John Candy, A Life in Comedy, includes interviews with many of Candy's closest friends and colleagues, including, ready for this list? This list is crazy. Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, Tom Hanks, Ron Howard, Steve Martin, Catherine O'Hara, Martin Short, and as you can tell by the last name, Paul's brother Mike, as in Mike Myers' Second City and SNL. Oh, son, there's a Scarborough tangent coming up. Whoop, whoop. I guess whoop, whoop is not really a Scarborough. That's my bad. Letting down the team on that one. But yeah, in this conversation with Paul, he touches upon an underappreciated aspect of John Candy's legacy. Americans adore planes, trains, and automobiles, and even Uncle Buck. Paul was saying that they don't go, that's Toronto's John Candy. They just see a great character actor, a great comedian, right? A great character actor. And that's their associations with John Candy. But the thing is with John Candy, here in Canada, John Candy had a singular Canadian impact. On the surface, there are lots of obvious similarities between Canada and the United States of America. But when you've truly traveled through both countries extensively, you quickly realize there are unique countries. These are two different places. It's easy to point out Canadians enjoy poutine and ketchup chips. However, that list of notable distinctions should include John Candy. I appreciate that in this conversation, Paul emphasizes context. He wants to bring contemporary readers into the context of the John Candy era, because there is a significant you had to be there element to it. I never watched the first 5 seasons of SNL, Saturday Night Live, in real time from 75 to 80. I never saw the Ramones or Talking Heads live at CBGB. Beatlemania. I read about all these cultural experiences as historical events, recognizing they have a profound impact on my current pop culture. But with John Candy, with Second City and the sketch comedy revolution with SCTV and Mike Myers on SNL, I was there, even if some of it was through reruns. I learned to swim in that comedy wave. When Michael Jordan retired, I was a punk kid. I was shocked. I somehow believed Jordan would just play forever. I didn't fully grasp that no matter how special an era is, it would come to an end. I'm so thankful for Paul Myers' book, John Candy, A Life in Comedy. The conversation you're about to hear covers Steve Martin, Martin Short, Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, countless others. John Candy lived a blessed life, and in turn, we were blessed. And now, here's Stephanie, who has the Spaceballs to drop an introduction. Hey, hit it.
Sound, the final frontier. My Summer Lair is an enterprise, a pop culture voyage with a continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new creators and celebrate established producers, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now here is your host, Sammy Yunnan.
I want to kind of ease into your book, though, but did you end up seeing the John Candy documentary, I Like Me, at TIFF?
I have not seen it because I wasn't in Toronto when it screened.
Yeah. I know you're on the West Coast.
I'm in the process of trying to get a screener, but I will see it.
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Colin Hanks is a great documentarian. What did you think of it?
A couple of things. One was it was a bit of a head trip because I watched it while I was reading your book, so it was great to have some of the visuals for
Yes.
like what you were talking about. Like in your book, for example, you talked to Tom Hanks and he mentioned the Leave It to Beaver sketch.
Yeah.
And I remember vaguely like a Dennis to Menace kind of vibe to it, but I was like, I couldn't quite remember the sketch. So I was like, I got to Google this. And then they had it in there in the documentary. So I was like, oh man, this is gold. This is really funny.
I love that. Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the things that was kind of interesting. I'd never watched SCTV sketches with a large audience before. And
yeah.
and they laughed. Like the modern audiences laughed. Conan talked about the Yellow Belly sketch. I don't remember this one at all.
I remember that story. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've heard him tell that story.
For people that don't know, John Candy's like this kind of, it's a Wild Wild West sketch, and John Candy's this like nervous Nelly. He's all like timid and shaking, and like everything scares him. And I don't know how you even say this out loud without it sounding weird, but he overreacts everything. So he shoots a kid, and then he shoots Catherine O'Hara, the kid's mom. I don't know. It's funny when you see it, and Conan thinks it's hilarious.
Well, it's funny certainly, given recent life events, the things that were going on. But yeah, I think obviously the joke was that they're making fun of violence as an overreaction, and there's a way to make it fun of it. But obviously it was a different time.
Yeah, but my audience laughed. They part of it
Yeah.
just was the way that Conan was describing it, but the sketch itself, like Candy's humor, it came through.
Yeah. Well, that was it. The humanity, right? The humanity of his performance. He didn't just make you think of a character that was kind of a buffoon and maybe overreacting. You saw that maybe, there's a little bit of frightened child in him. In all his work, there's a humanity and a vulnerability that's something that I came to when I was doing this research. So yeah, I mean, I love that they made this movie. Sometimes you have to, clear photographs for a photo section in a book, and once I knew that the documentary was coming out, I thought, I don't need to sweat this because everyone's going to be able to see the documentary, but they'll read my book. My book has a whole different thing going on, just to be clear. I actually think books do a whole different thing, and I'm telling a narrative story that I hope is engaging and something you can take with you and read. But if you wanted to see the visuals, like instead of doing what I did, which is have to scour YouTube for 3 years, I'm sure the Colin Hanks film is packed with amazing clips. So again, think of it as the photo section for my book. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, obviously. And your book goes into a lot more in depth too, like especially with a lot of the Toronto stuff.
Yeah.
Like they kind of glossed some of that over and just kind of more focused on like once they got to SCTV and then kind of like started making Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
You have a bigger section too on like the Argos.
Yeah, because I think American audiences might not care as much, but I found it interesting because of his early football injury in high school that he was still a Toronto Argonauts fan all those years. And then when he got the chance to use his celebrity and let's say wealth to invest in the Toronto Argonauts and got them the Grey Cup, like he worked at helping them have one of their best seasons, for a time.
Yeah. So and this is the thing, like your book, like I'm from Toronto as well. So reading a huge chunk of your John Candy book, I don't know how to phrase this, but like your Toronto-ness came through. Like you're writing about the Fire Hall of Second City. I've been to performances. The 505 on Queen Street, 1063 Avenue Road, Eaton Center. It feels like parts of Candy's story is almost like your story. Am I like misreading it, or is this parallel?
It's very interesting. It's very insightful of you to catch that. This sounds a bit like a long answer, so I'm going to try.
Go for it. I'll go make a sandwich if you want.
Everything I do, sometimes it's my idea to write a certain book. Sometimes an editor will come to me and say, "Can you write this book?" In the case of the Long John Baldry book I wrote. I bought into this idea that I could tell the story of the '60s blues invasion in London. And it was also about Long John Baldry. So what I said to the editor who offered that to me, I said, can I tell the story of how bands like the Stones and everyone got together and American blues? And he said, sure, if that's part of Baldry's story. So in this case, let's go back. One book, the Kids in the Hall book. I literally was there. One Dumb Guy. I was literally there when the kids in the hall were just cutting their teeth.
Mhm.
And I had actually taken Second City workshops. And my brother Mike, elephant in the room, my brother Mike, big sketch comedian. We were all super sketch comedy fans in Toronto when all this was happening. Second City had established itself. Kids in the hall were coming up. So was Mike. And so that book, One Dumb Guy, I kind of even inserted myself in the beginning of it to let you know, dear reader, I am telling you a story, but I'm guiding you through something that I can actually tell you happened because I was there. John Candy had passed away in 94, so I didn't have that luxury. But what I did have was a memory of the Canadian cultural impact of
That's
John
it.
Candy, and being a sketch fan, being a fan of SCTV, but also of Python and Saturday Night Live, the context of a sketch comedy revolution.
Mhm.
I wanted to drop you into that, but I also wanted to drop you into what it was like when he passed away, because it was like a national tragedy. It was, his funeral was on TV. And so that's a very Canadian perspective, but there is something exportable about all of this because in this case, this is a Canadian success story that everyone around the world knew about. Americans love Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and Uncle Buck. They don't go, that's Toronto's John Candy. They just see a great character actor, great character comedian, but also a great character actor. And, they have their own associations with John Candy. They might have come to him on Only the Lonely, which is not one of the biggest hit films, but showed a vulnerability and a potential for what he could do.
Mhm.
And so there's always a different audience for the story. And my job was to try and tell the story in a way that was both committed to the truth, but also trying to drop you into the context because it
Yeah.
is 30 years ago. And 30 years is great because in a weird way, we can look better in the rearview mirror from today, but we also have to use the archival things that I found to sort of get the context of back when fat jokes were cool, back
Yeah.
when it was okay to tell somebody in an interview that they're a big man and they don't think they should be a leading man because they're overweight.
That was quite
Body
shocking.
shaming was rampant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So that's what I did in the book, I hope.
I want to stick with that context because I want to go back a little bit further to your origins. You mentioned like having this passion for sketch comedy, and like you mentioned your brother, obviously Mike Myers, another like sketch enthusiast, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like you guys take comedy seriously. Is
Oh,
that
yeah.
is that upbringing? Is that growing up in Toronto? Like,
Yeah,
can you
yeah,
express where
yeah,
that
we have-
passion
yeah.
or that nerdery comes from?
Nerdery for sure. As the comedian Dana Gould told me recently when he'd read my book and he said, "You know what I love about talking to comedy nerds like you," and I knew that was a compliment.
Mhm.
And I will say I would also add my brother Peter is the older brother. So there's this little committee when I'm a kid,
Mhm.
and it's Peter's the older, I'm the middle, and Mike's the younger. We're two things. We're Canadians at a time post, and Canadians will know what I mean, post the Confederation celebration. Canada had just turned only 100,
Mhm.
if you can remember that. That's how old I am.
Mhm.
But I feel like it sometimes. But so we were all champions of Canadian stuff. And the idea of, can you make it from here? Or can we do something as Canadians? Because we watch American and British comedies
Mhm.
and British TV and action movies. And there was always this sort of training wheels that we weren't quite ready for the prime time. No pun intended with Saturday Night Live. But
That's right.
and
Yeah.
then, but then we started to claim that with Canadians still do this. We claim Neil Young, we claim Joni Mitchell, but they had to leave.
Mhm.
So what we do is, and then this has gotten a lot better, by the way, in the last 30 years or
Mhm.
40 years. But I grew up with that sort of cheering for the home team sensibility, as well as the sketch comedy revolution. So my two brothers and I think we kind of formed each other's tastes. And it was in music too. Like,
Mhm.
Peter brought home the first Led Zeppelin records, but he also brought home the Talking Heads and XTC,
Oh,
which
good job,
all those
Peter.
things changed. All that, yeah, exactly. So this is the older brother effect. See Cameron Crowe's older sister in Almost Famous.
Mhm.
Same effect. And and then we all kind of discovered things on our own. And while we were still living at home, we would share them. And one of the things we shared was Second City Television, and we just ate it up. And then we went, oh my God, they taped that show in Don Mills. I was living in Agincourt, which it was called at the time, which is North York, but it's just above Don
I'm from
Mills.
there. I know where it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So Barbara Green Road is where SCTV was filmed originally
Yeah.
for the Global
I had
TV
friends who went to
network.
Stephen Leacock.
Okay, and Mike went to Stephen Leacock
Correct,
too.
yeah.
I went to Sir John A. Macdonald, and Peter went to George Vanier. So
okay,
we
my
all
sister went to
different.
John A. Macdonald. I went
Yeah,
to Lamoureux.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know
went
the
to
area
Woodbine.
you're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, I loved Macdonald because it was a place where my brothers hadn't gone, so it was like there was a whole bunch of other stuff we could talk about on a brother podcast. But the idea of you share so much culturally, then there's a moment where you have to sort of go, well, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
And so we made our solo albums, if you will.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I digress for that little suburban detour. My point being, our viewpoint was definitely one of, what is this sketch comedy? What is this? And we didn't call it sketch comedy even. We just thought, funny people. And we didn't know the difference between stand up and sketch. And then years later, I would have to say, without sounding like I'm bragging, calling myself an expert, the comedy nerd in me, plus the researcher biographer in me, I feel like I really appreciate when something new comes up. Like, I remember when Key and Peele came on the air.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this is the new thing. At the time, it was the new thing. And I actually had a chance to tell Keegan-Michael Key this, and he kind of got it because he's a nerd too. I said, my God, I grew up with Python, SCTV, and then suddenly Key and Peele. And he was, he didn't call security, so I think I was okay. But
always a
and
good
he's
sign.
He's a lovely man, so
Yeah.
it was actually perfectly nice. But you see what I'm saying? Anyway, so this is where I need to stop rambling and let you actually ask me some questions.
Well, no, but that's what I was getting at. Like when I mentioned your brother Mike, but also your other brother. Like you guys seem to see comedy as almost like an art form, like more of
it sure is.
more
It
of a
sure
science
is.
than a magic, if that makes sense.
Well, no, I think it's both.
yeah.
I think it's science, magic. The problem with comedy is that whenever we try to make it sound rarefied, it ends up risking sounding pretentious. Like we are all clowns and the mirth tells us who we are. But that's true.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true. It was true with Charlie Chaplin. It was true with John Candy.
Mm-hmm.
You see, he was a buffoon in some of those films, but boy, was he a buffoon that we knew.
Yeah. He was an art buffoon.
Del Griffith was a real guy. And when he does the I Like Me, by the way, the first chapter in my book's called I Like Me because I identified that. And then I find out that Colin Hanks and Ryan Reynolds had also identified that as the key. And it's the key is that this is a man of quiet dignity who is often maligned from the exterior forces, but won't be defined by them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the dignity of that, it's like, we always say we like the common man or the common person. And sometimes we don't live up to that because, but he's just a common man.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The common man has quiet dignity and can be noble as well as ungraceful at times.
Mm-hmm.
That's humanity, right? Now I'm being pretentious, but sorry.
No.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel. I've thought about this for about 4 years.
Yeah, I get it. But there's a great quote you have on page 40. I just got to get it out and read it to you because
Sure.
this was a great insight. You write on page 40, back in Toronto, Candy and the cast began to forge a uniquely Canadian vision of the Second City theater philosophy. This comedy was sillier and slightly less cerebral than the Chicago way, than Chicago's Second City. But silly is like, especially for SCTV, silly is a compliment.
Yeah.
That Daryl Sittler like Wheaties commercial, right?
Yeah,
Where like
yeah.
Candy's supposed to be like this hockey player.
Casting
Daryl-
John Candy. As
Yeah,
Daryl
but he's like a
Sittler.
big
Yeah.
dude, but Daryl Sittler's like a fit guy, but it's like he's selling Wheaties. I mentioned the Conan Bryan sketch with like Yellow Belly, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a silly sketch. But silly is what makes the sketches so endearing. So as much as we celebrate Candy's vulnerability, his other mutant ability is the ability to be silly.
Absolutely. And, let's look at Silly because Silly is a very, very, there's slapstick comedy from the old days, going back again to Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton.
Mm-hmm.
Those things were slapstick and silly, but they were incredibly, modern times by Charlie Chaplin. I mean, the great dictator.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a way to be silly. And let's go right to the Godhead, Monty Python's Flying Circus. People talk about how smart that show was, but they had things like penguins exploding on top of TVs, and they had people,
It's just a flesh wound. It's very silly.
Oh, there's so much silly in Holy Grail, So I think I've come to the place where okay, this is like I have a galaxy brain, I think, with the ADD and everything. But let me say this, people talk about pop music, for instance, and they say Paul McCartney, for instance, wrote the silly songs, silly love songs, blah, blah, blah. And then you listen to them and you go, I don't know, man. He kind of talked about something really important there, but he just pretended it was something silly. So then you go, oh, wait a minute. There's no guilty pleasure. That whole idea that, Electric Light Orchestra is a guilty pleasure. There's just art that has different ways of going about it. Some wears itself very seriously.
Mhm.
Some presents as silly. And sometimes stuff is silly, and that's all it needs to be. Right?
Yeah.
A good cartoon, a New Yorker cartoon, can just be two deer talking about how one of them has a target on his back and said, "Bummer of a birthmark, Hal."
Yeah.
So anyway, this is where I'm at in my life. Is I don't judge the sort of simpleness of something. In fact, it's kind of hard to pull it off if you've ever tried it, and that's another thing. I think I've talked to so many comedy professionals, and when you see someone like a John Candy in his prime, like
Mhm.
when he had finally cracked the code and knew how to, because he was a great actor,
Yeah.
and when you see that at work, you go, you want to watch it again. If you're a student of this stuff, you want to watch it again. You go, oh my God, how did he pull that off?
It's a magic
You
trick.
know,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it looks easy. So there's, like you said, magic and science.
Yeah, and I think like Planes, Trains is an obvious example because you have the silliness of like my hand is between two pillows, right? Which is a ridiculous
aren't
bit, and
pillows.
everyone laughs. And then you
Yeah.
have the speech, as you said, the "I like me" speech, right? Like my customers like me, my wife likes me. The ability to pull off the vulnerability and like that the acting in that scene, it doesn't work
Yeah.
if Candy doesn't deliver. It also my hand is between two pillows doesn't work if Candy doesn't deliver there either.
Yeah. And that's also a great synergy of two comedian actors who wanted to be a little more real in this role to make it work, to make the sort of the jarring conflict of the two guys work as humans. But John Hughes, who some people malign the teen comedies. I think they were a genius for their time. Some of
I
them
love
don't
them.
some of them don't age well because of some of the inappropriate sexual stuff. But the bottom line is John Hughes was always trying to do something that was an accurate portrayal of something he observed.
Mhm.
Now, and you can argue about, the clumsiness of certain things, but when he started making films for adults, so to speak, or about adults, he brought himself to it. He was both Steve Martin's character and John Candy's character.
Mhm.
Like and John Candy knew that John Hughes was his guy.
Yeah.
If John Hughes had kept making movies and John Candy had lived, who knows what they could have done? And that's one of the sad questions I ask all the way through the book is, what did we lose? We know what we lost from what we saw,
Mhm.
but what unmade things, and now John Hughes is gone,
Right,
so
yeah.
so it's kind of a beautiful thing and that's again the context, trying to get back into, wow, when Candy and Hughes got together, something worked for both of them.
Mhm.
And it didn't, they had successes outside of that, but when they got together, it was, McCartney and Lennon, It
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
And I say that because I have to put the Beatles into everything I do.
You were pretty good restrained, although you dropped Paul McCartney early on. But
I did, yeah. It's going to happen.
it's going to happen. But the thing is, I just circling back again just to the John Candy documentary, just for this one reference, but like Macaulay Culkin, adult Macaulay Culkin, as contemporary Macaulay Culkin is being interviewed, and he said, "I don't know why me and Molly Ringwald and other people are kind of associated with John Hughes movies. It's John Candy because he did the most." Right? Like he was in
Yeah.
even when he did things like Home Alone and Career Opportunities or National Lampoon's Vacation, he was only in them briefly, but he did a lot of John Hughes movies, either as a writer, producer, or director.
Yeah.
So he's kind of become the face. You kind of touched upon it, but can you expand on it? Like what made their collaboration so special? Because John obviously worked with a lot of people well, like
Yeah.
Dave Thomas, Eugene Levy. But what
Oh,
made
yeah.
the two
Andre Martin and Catherine O'Hara, got to mention them.
yeah, like there's a whole range of people that he was great at collaborating, but what made especially like the John
Yeah.
Hughes and the two Johns, I guess, what made those collaborations so special?
Okay, I think it's, and I was lucky to speak with James Hughes from the Hughes family on
Mhm.
this, and there was a lot of similarities in the two. John Hughes was from the Chicago area,
Mhm.
and that's a Great Lakes city, and then there's a hockey. They both loved NHL hockey. They both knew harsh winters in big cities, and they both knew. They both had moved to Hollywood at the same time and felt both embraced and alienated by it at times. And like the Canadian attitude and the North Midwestern attitude are not poles apart. You know, I find affinity with people in Minnesota and Illinois all the time.
Brother from
Michigan.
another mother.
Yeah. There's definitely, you know, two solitudes between us, you know, and at the same time, they were both at a stage in their careers where they had translated their, and again, I guess I wish I had a better term than common man charm, but they both had a certain, they weren't glam people, you know, and they both had a sense of working class ethics. And Hughes, you know, I'm more convinced than ever that Hughes was some kind of, you know, Frank Capra for his time. And I don't care if a film critic gets mad at me for saying that, but somebody who reflected the social and certainly of a time. I mean, I don't know how well that endures for 30 years, but he spoke to a certain kind of, and let's face it, it was a very white, middle class, waspy background. So that's why you can't say he broadly spoke for the entire generation, but you could say that for his truth and his reality, he did what great art does, which is he reflected it. He did storytelling, and storytelling's function is also to connect us to the humanity in all of us. And I see stories with like Black actors or feminist stories, and I'm not any of those things, and yet I can see the humanity in those works, and that's why I will always want to see different cultures than my own.
Yeah.
Because it's you find out just how much we're alike in some ways, and also you find out the fascinating differences. And it really just makes you feel, it's a feel-good thing when it works, because you just go, wow, instead of feeling alienated, I feel more connected.
Yeah.
And anyway, so that's what Hughes did on his own.
There's a universality there.
Yes, exactly. And Candy, I think, was just at that place. He had an emotional intelligence, I'd say above average. And that's why he was so nice to people. And that's why he was so considerate of social justice around him, you know, interactions and his own dignity too. Like you could not mess with him. If you messed with him and he felt you messed with him, you knew about it. And this is, I can say that like I know, because everyone told me that. You know, I have anecdotal evidence to back that up, and from Dave Thomas and other people, and Joe Flaherty, and even Ivan Reitman, who told me, you know, stuff. So when Candy met Hughes, he recognized, you know the expression "game no game."
Yeah.
Like they saw each other from across the room, so to speak. And some of the films that Hughes didn't direct, he actually wrote and produced, such as Only the Lonely was a production of Hughes, and it was directed by Chris Columbus. And Chris Columbus did Home Alone too.
Yeah.
Home Alone and Home Alone 2.
Yeah.
No, he didn't do Home Alone 2, did he? But anyway, my point is he did Home Alone. And again, I am happy that I got Chris Columbus. I had a great, let's say it was 3 hours, maybe 2.5 hours with Chris Columbus, who could not have been nicer, more detailed, and a memory like a steel trap. He told me so much. You know, every time I interviewed somebody, even if it didn't show up on the page afterwards, they were giving me a bit of a profile. Valerie Bromfield did that too. Valerie Bromfield, who was one of the unsung Canadian acting heroes. She and Dan Aykroyd convinced Candy to join Second City or to audition for it, but she worked with him several times, and she's got such insight into his personality that just talking to her for 2 hours, even if she didn't show up for 2 hours worth in the book, I went away feeling like, and she told me, she goes, I think you understand him. And I went, you can say that even though you know I didn't meet him? She goes, just the things you've asked me, you're on the right track. And that's invaluable to a writer, right?
Yeah.
Especially because there's no way I can get an interview with John Candy.
Right.
So I've rambled again. Sorry.
No, I'm fine with your rambling, but I want to ask a dumb question now
Oh, sure.
in response to your rambling. So some of the bigger names in your book, for example, are like Steve Martin and Martin Short and Dan Aykroyd. Like, you weren't just talking to them about John Candy, and you weren't like securing John Candy stories for your book. You were also asking them about, as you said earlier, John Candy's legacy and his comedy impact.
Yeah.
I want to just take a break from Candy for a moment, but like, do these guys, are they aware of their special contributions? Like, Steve Martin is huge. Does Steve Martin know who Steve Martin is? Like,
you'd have to ask Steve Martin.
But yeah, but I mean, it's the same thing. Like,
here's what I know.
Yeah.
Here's what I know from, like, again, anecdotally from talking to these people.
Yeah.
And I feel like everybody, you know, here's the best example, actually, one you didn't mention, and it's sometimes a very controversial one, is Chevy Chase.
Yeah.
Who I was afraid I was like, I want to talk to Chevy Chase because they did those great scenes in Vacation, National Lampoon's Vacation, and then there's this headlock story that everyone was telling me, which we'll get into if you want. But my point being that I thought, okay, when I talk to Chevy Chase, I bet he's going to be angry, and I bet he's going to say something snide or nasty. He was the opposite, complete shock, like and couldn't have been nicer, and really acknowledged something that I'd picked up on from him, which was these people, including Lorraine Newman and Gilda and Catherine O'Hara, they were all the flying aces of a certain, when we talk about World War II fighter pilots, and there's this kind of a weird nobility amongst them, like they all knew what it was like to be in active combat, and they were graceful in the air. And I think there's a sense that the Saturday Night Live troupe, the SCTV troupe, and the Pythons, Monty Python, Graham Chapman was a big fan of John Candy. It's in the book. And there's a sense that they all, again, game, no game. Like they all saw each other as very unique small club. I think Chevy Chase said that. It was a small group. Only a few of us know what it was like. Again, the Beatle analogy is McCartney and Ringo Starr talk about that. But there was only 4 Beatles, and only those 4 people know what it was like.
Yeah.
And in this case, it was a little broader circle. But I was really touched by that. And as I guess I can call myself a comedy historian at this point. I'm no Cliff Nestoroff, but Cliff actually confirmed some of this for me because I had access to Cliff, one of the great comedy historians. But
he pops up in a lot of documentaries the last couple of years.
Yeah, and he's popped up in 2 of my books now. So it's sort of my the Woody Allen scene where he pulls out Marshall McLuhan. Cliff is kind of my go-to. Like, what do you think, Cliff Nestoroff? But shout out to Cliff. He's great. He's doing a great service for the history of comedy. But my point being that, this is something of a historical nature, a break. People talk about the stand-up comedy revolution that people like Seinfeld and Jay Leno were part of with Dave Letterman, and Carol Leifer and people like that. And this sketch comedy thing, I don't know if it's ever really gotten its props, much like you were saying about silliness and comedy not being taken seriously. I talked to Lorraine Newman quite a bit actually lately because she's also a friend, but Lorraine Newman, who was one of the great, from the pioneering SNL cast, her context for all this stuff is, they were also social. They all knew each other, but they were all part of something bigger, and some had come from the National Lampoon, some had come from Second City Toronto, some had come from Second City Chicago, and then later with Lorraine, the Groundlings, in LA. And those are very small clubs, and I think so I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's sort of what I was getting at, is that there was a feeling that they all kind of knew. Aykroyd's so good in my book when he talks about the finishing school aspect of it, like that Second City, Toronto specifically, taught so many people how to do this.
Yeah.
And I will say Martin Short, Andrea Martin, Catherine O'Hara, even Gilda Radner, who got training there, and Aykroyd and Dave Thomas and Joe Flaherty, Harold Ramis, like a generation. It's almost like Second City was the other half of what Godspell Toronto cast was, a breeding ground for the next generation.
Right.
So and they all knew each other at the 1063 Avenue Road hangs, in Toronto. So,
although Candy was always kind of surly with the Godspell people.
Well, and that's I love that, by the way. I love that both Martin Short and Dave Thomas have a very clear memory of Candy not being down with musical theater, which is, I love that. And I love that it didn't matter, that they all hung out and they played with the Albert Brooks Comedy -1 records together, and they would all like put each other on this. Well, how amazing is this if you're a comedy fan and nerd to think about this, lofty group of people being social, making tapes for each other. It's amazing. It's like the CBGB's scene was to punk rock, like. Oh
yeah, that's a great analogy. So let's stick with the music then as another analogy. Like I assume for research purposes, as you said, you spent 3-4 years on this book. Like you watched a lot of the movies, you watched a lot of SCTV sketches. Yeah, right. So as a music guy, sometimes we don't fully appreciate an album at its time when it's released, or we don't recognize that was like, a genre transforming album or even a masterpiece perhaps. And then as time goes on, we realize, oh, that's a really important album, right? Like,
Yeah.
Was there
Oh no,
anything?
I mean, Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys was not a hit album when it came out. It
Correct,
was not
yeah.
well received, and now it's the only one most people talk about.
Yeah, God only knows why. So, was there a certain John Candy performance that maybe we should revisit or look at through fresh eyes? That when you went back now to sit down and watch all this, you're like, whoa, John Candy really delivered.
You know, I don't know if it's underappreciated, but Cool Runnings, which was sold at the time as a Disney, because it was a Disney film,
Mm-hmm.
and it seemed like a one-liner joke, which is the story of the Jamaican bobsledding team.
Mm-hmm.
And you just think, ha ha, yeah, and it's red, green, and gold. It's going to be like
Yeah.
one long Jamaican joke, but it's
It
not.
writes itself.
Yeah, but it's not. And it's actually a true story, which helps a lot. And I don't know if the version in the story is exactly how it happened, but Candy brings, again, he brought himself to it, because the story is a person who had success before, and in the case of the character, he had a scandal that ruined his Olympic career, but he was going to apply everything to this new generation of people who weren't jaded.
Mm-hmm.
And in the making of the movie, we see that John Candy, the experienced movie professional, was helping out many of these people. It's their first time in a film, some of them first time acting, and he becomes the coach in real life to these young actors that he's playing on the screen. So there's a real sense that, yeah, he did that a lot, actually, because he also did that in Uncle Buck. He had two kids of his own, so when he was playing the uncle to these kids, Gabby Hoffman, young Gabby Hoffman, and Macaulay Culkin, and he understood the right blend of paternal energy, and So anyway, but in the case of Cool Runnings, I would say that's an underappreciated performance, and I don't know if everyone appreciates just how masterful Uncle Buck is. Like Roger Ebert didn't like it. He thought it was too nasty
Mm-hmm.
and too dark. But I mean, it's real. It's still got the humanity. So I don't know if it's underappreciated, because it's a lot of people's favorite film.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, but I could see Ebert's dark comment as well. Like I could see there's darkness in it.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it adds to it. It almost like salt and pepper. Like it works.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right?
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think Ebert's problems were more with the overall sort of nihilistic tone of the film, the threatening violence to kids, and and I again, who knows what Roger was thinking. I tend to actually like Roger Ebert as a critic. I think he's a very keen observer, and so I don't discount him as a reviewer. But he just didn't. It didn't hit with him. It didn't feel good with him.
Well, let's stick with dark, but now change it up and apply that to John Candy, because I also like too that you made sure, at least it seemed like you made sure, that you didn't elevate John Candy as a saint. Like I know it's tricky for you as a writer and as a journalist, but like, for example, he kept like a catalog of slights, like of grievances,
Yeah. That's what I was talking.
Is it a challenge for you to write about somebody so beloved like John Candy, to kind of like show some of the rougher edges, I guess? I don't know how else to phrase it.
I think the challenge was to maybe this is what you're asking, but the challenge was to not look like I'm attacking him or trying to bring him down, because every case that I brought up,
that's what I'm asking.
We have Dave Thomas. I was constantly remembering that the people who shared these stories are sharing them out of love. And there was a sense that even when John Candy was angry at someone, or had a vendetta, or feeling that somebody couldn't be trusted anymore, and he wasn't scheming. He wasn't.
He didn't tent his hands and like come up with plans.
He wasn't Kash Patel and Stephen Miller with an enemies list. He was just somebody who had been hurt. And really, what I was trying to get across was, when Candy did have these issues with people, it was, again, it seemed like an offense to his sense of justice. Like he did not suffer what he perceived as fools.
Yeah.
He didn't like it when CBC used his size as an ad copy for the Gemini Awards, and so he pulled out of the show.
Yeah, they ran an ad that said we have a really big host. Get it?
They ran an ad, and it was, and he said, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
And instead of just admonishing them, he just quit. And because he could at that time too. I think there was a sense that they were getting a solid from him, and he was being disrespected in his understanding of it. And I feel like it was actually, I think it was
It
disrespectful.
was disrespectful, yeah.
But then, a lot of stuff, like, he liked to drink. He liked to have extra food, even though he was trying to be on a diet, so to show the challenge in any story is to give the person 3 dimensions. And unfortunately, that meant acknowledging that, as a recovering alcoholic myself, by the way, 27 years, 28 years sober.
Way to go, man.
I understand how you can accidentally just be a guy who drinks too much, and especially if you're Canadian, they start you early on the 2-4, like
Yeah.
it's, I think, other people might have had been nursed on a milk bottle, but I was drinking Stubbies behind the rehearsal hall when I was in bands,
Wow, yeah.
so, but I don't do that anymore. And I would say that, you talk about like Irish writers or English people, and there's going to be a lot of pub drinking in their stories too. So we're in the context of the 2025 when this was coming out, it might look like he had a drinking problem. I would say he drank more than I was comfortable hearing that he drank, but I don't know if, he, like as Ron Howard says, he showed up for work and he did great work. So again, if I was a psychoanalyst or somebody working in rehab for him, I would have all kinds of notes, but I'm not that guy. I'm not qualified to psychoanalyze John Candy or pass judgment, frankly. And so, and his family are pretty open in the interviews I've seen about how they, they wish that his mental health issues with anxiety, they wish that he was able to get more help earlier.
But also we didn't really know a lot about that stuff at that time too.
Yeah. Again, the context, right? You have to remember in those days, I mean, my parents from England, they would never even have saw a therapist, like, and yet I'm sure my parents could have. Sorry, there's a little unnecessary divergence into
you can
my.
Explore that later.
Exactly.
That's another podcast for another day.
Maybe I'll write the book about my parents someday.
There you go.
But they were great people.
I just want to circle back to what you were saying, because also his slights and grievances were not always just personal. You had the example in the book where he was not being paid, or as a Second City writer, SCTV writer.
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't just him, it was the ladies as well. And so he kind of helped push and make sure that everybody was getting paid as a writer, because they were all kind of improvising and coming up with material.
Yeah. There was a disagreement with, I think it was Harold Ramis, and I don't even know because Ramis isn't here to defend himself.
Yeah.
But the story being told to me that Ramis had a definition of what a writer was, because he was that kind of writer who would write sketches and sit at a typewriter, whereas improvisational actors of the kind that Second City were pioneering in, they would often just put a wig on and make up something, and then they'd have all the dialogue coming out of them. They're writing. It's live writing. Catherine O'Hara was very frank with me about how that is writing. And of course, Christopher Guest years later would use Catherine O'Hara to great effect for these, what they call scenarioed films, where they have a script idea, but then it's a Mighty Wind.
Mighty Wind, sorry. That was
an improvised version of Inherit the Wind would be very funny.
It would be.
I would like to see it.
Yes. Yeah, that would be funny.
12 angry men made up on the spot.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the theorem, the theory of comedy writing, or the definition is much broader now. I think we understand that more. And so when Candy found out he wasn't getting paid the same because he wasn't technically a writer, and then he found out that Andrea and Catherine weren't getting paid either that way, and it did kind of a favored nations thing and made sure that everybody in the cast who was creating material was recognized for that. And then eventually, I think he also got like a special arrangement later because he'd become one of the bigger stars. So I think of it as an element of payback, is that he just said, and you know what? I'm more expensive than any of them now. That's a whole other thing. And that's Andrew Alexander from Second City was very frank with me about the sort of how it almost wasn't personal after a while. Like they were just friends who, he was going to negotiate for the best rate for himself. And Andrew was like, I can't afford that, but I guess I have to,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm glad I got to talk to Andrew about that though, because besides being my brother's ex-boss, it was very,
that's right. Yeah.
I had never spoken with him for any length of time before. So it was really great to hear it from his side, because he was producing Second City Television.
Yeah. And this again is focused on the slights because they had I guess, I don't know, falling out might be a strong word, but disagreement, or they didn't see eye to eye, John Candy and Alex.
Yeah, there was a parting of the ways for a while, and then a reconciliation, and several reconciliations over the years.
But that's the thing, I think, what you're getting at when I said, like, you made John Candy three-dimensional, because it's like he had these slights and these grievances, but they weren't like grudges, right? Like, he was able to, like, you said with the Second City, like, cast, like, just make sure the ladies got paid as well. Like, he was doing it for everyone. It wasn't like a personal thing. With Alex and Second City and SCTV, like, they resolved their issue and kind of got back on the same page. So it's like, it's just the messiness of life, I guess, is just the best way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. And, and again, the sense of justice, and justice to himself, but also for others. Like, and so, the story in Only the Lonely, the great actress Maureen O'Hara, who had not had a lot of Hollywood successes in this era in her life, but she had been John Wayne's romantic lead in all these films. Co-star, and so John Candy knew the value of Maureen O'Hara from the old movies, but she's in Only the Lonely, and she gets a tiny trailer, and John Candy flips out. Like, he asks his posse to empty out his own trailer, which is fairly substantial, and like give it to Maureen O'Hara, because the producers had not given her a big trailer. So then a little argument ensues, within the production, and they just get Maureen another trailer. And then John moves back into his trailer, so stories like that, which I've heard from 4 people, by the way, including Jim Belushi, who's co-starred in the film, and Chris Columbus. Those stories make me see that, he didn't, no one asked him to do that. Yeah. Maureen didn't say, "Can you help me?" Yeah. Maureen O'Hara was like, humble, and she was just happy to be working, and she loved working with John Candy. And, she verified for all of us that he was a great film actor too, which I thought was really a nice moment when she said, he shows up on set and she goes, "The actor is here." Wow. And she's not making fun. She's not making, it wasn't being sarcastic. And that helped John with his insecurity, because, maybe he didn't know if people could see that he's like acting, that he's the actor,
Yeah. Sticking with acting though, one of the things I really liked in your John Candy biography is the near misses. Candy in Ghostbusters, for example.
Yeah.
For the Rick Moranis role, the Keymaster. Rick killed it in that movie. Like, that's not to say that John Candy wouldn't be good. I just don't think he would have fit as well as like what Rick did. Yeah,
and I think in the book you'll see Aykroyd and Dan Aykroyd, who had written the script, and Ivan Reitman. They both also knew that what Candy wanted to do wasn't what they had in mind, but he wanted to play this Bavarian guy with 2 big dogs, and what Dan Aykroyd described to me as a Tyrolean thing, like, which I guess is a specific kind of alpine character, and and then actually I think it was Candy who said, Candy, I can't remember how this happened, but there was a suggestion from Candy that maybe Rick Moranis wants this.
Yeah,
and he could have been in Three Amigos.
Yeah.
Candy could have been in Three Amigos, but he didn't want to go to, they were going to shoot in Spain at the time. I don't think they ended up shooting in Spain, but he said, "I don't want to be away in Spain for 3 months."
There was the Martin Short role.
So, and then I got the sense that Marty called him to say, "Are you going to do it?" And they thought they were talking about just John doing it. And I think Marty was waiting to find out if he would do it. Like,
right, yeah,
like, if you're not doing it, I definitely want this.
Yes, yeah.
Martin Short, yeah. Who was also couldn't have been nicer when I talked to him. These are my heroes, by the way. Like Steve Martin, Martin Short, when I'm talking to these guys, and Tom Hanks, and they're super nice to me because it's Candy. It's not me personally.
Yeah.
They're trusting me to tell this story for them.
Yeah.
And but the biggest one was, can I go back to John Hughes for a second?
Yeah.
This film called Bartholomew and Neff that was a Sylvester Stallone, John Candy action comedy that Candy signs up to do, thinking it's going to be a really great use, because John Hughes was going to write and direct it, and then John Hughes had decided a few of his films weren't working, and he decided, "I don't want to direct anymore. I don't want to do more films. I think I'll just be a producer of Home Alone, for a while." And then Sylvester Stallone gets cold feet about doing a comedy film because I think another comedy he didn't do so well. So he says, "I'm just going to go back to action films." That's my bad impression. And
That's
then
not bad, actually.
just got to go back to action films. Anyway,
I guess a little
and then
worse as you
Candy,
go, yeah.
but Candy goes, "Oh, great! I guess I can walk from this contract with the production." And they go, "Not so fast, John Candy. You're the only guy we've got now." And so he's contractually obligated to basically deliver one film for this company. And that film ends up, so not only does this great Bartholomew and Neff never get made, and Hughes and Candy never work again in anything, and the film that Candy gets sent to do is Wagons East.
The last one, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it ends up being where he dies. So he dies in the desert making a film that he's not sure he should be making, but he's going to get it done. And he'll be free of his contract. And, they were offering him a substantial sum of money. So he thought, I'll do this, I'll get the payday, and then I can go back to choosing my roles carefully. And then, he has a heart attack. And just, I do 3 whole chapters on this because not only is there the time he dies, there's the immediate repercussions in Hollywood and Toronto. And then there's the legacy. So, you couldn't just rush that.
Yeah.
I felt like after I told you how great he was, I have to tell you about the absence and what he left, he left behind for his kids, his wife, as well as his career.
You couldn't do that little paragraph at the end of a movie. Where they just kind of sum it all up and then they lived happily ever after.
No, it had to be. And I tell you, when I was writing those things, I was a stern fellow. Like I would come in every morning to work on it, and I'd be like, tell my wife at the end of the day, well, wrote the death scene.
Yeah.
And then of course you rewrite it. You do it once and then you have to do it again because you have to sort of figure out if you're telling it right. And, so I relived all these scenes so many times. And I'm sure whatever it was for me, it was 18,000 times worse for his friends and family. So,
yeah.
But, and you can see that in the book, like the reactions that people had.
It still feels fresh.
It still feels fresh. It hasn't really healed. Time has given it context. Time has given people a chance to have a life beyond their life with John. But I'm sure you ask any of them, and it's living. Absence and grief are a living thing. They're part of the family, And I hope I got that humanity and compassion across because that was on my mind the entire time.
You did, yeah.
And I had a responsibility.
It is a huge responsibility, but I also just you just mentioned you talked to Martin Short and Tom Hanks. You host the Record Store Day podcast, right? Where you often talk to bands.
I do the weekly podcast for the Record Store Day people. It's on all year, every week.
You often talk to bands, but I mean, you had the Mark Romanek episode.
Yeah, filmmaker Mark Romanek.
Yeah, that was a great episode. But
thank you.
I find that I've done the same things too. I've hung out with some famous comedians and stuff like that, and I find that when you talk to comedians, it's a completely different mindset than when you talk to musicians. It's they're not on the same kind of page, even though they both kind of make creativity for a living. The comedian mind or the comedy mind, it's a little bit more unique and it has a strange mindset. Do you find that as well?
I'm not trying to argue with you, but I would say that I maybe need more examples of what you're saying because I have a slight difference of opinion on that.
Okay, no, I don't mind that either. But I just find that when comedians get together, for example, they tend to get really dark. There was one time I was in a green room with a bunch of comedians and they had a fire and their house burned down, whatever. The rest of the comedians that were in the green room were making fire jokes and laughing or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't being mean. It's just the mindset. This was a situation that happened. It's like a breakup or something or a divorce. And so they were making jokes related to that. And some of them jokes were funny, even though the dude's house just burned down. But that's what I'm saying. When I've hung out with bands or talked to musicians, I don't find it necessarily goes as dark, if that makes sense. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah. Well, I understand that because there's a tradition and it comes up in the book, this book of gallows humor.
Yeah.
And actually in my last book, Kids in the Hall, some terrible things were happening outside the Kids in the Hall when they would go into this boardroom to write the movie Brain Candy, and to the point where Kevin McDonald kept referring to it as the boardroom of death. There's all this terrible stuff that happened in their private lives. And so they would project it in their comedy. But more sort of literally, Candy's funeral was one of the greatest Dan Aykroyd performances ever.
Yeah, the eulogy,
Los Angeles
right?
funeral. And I actually mentioned in the book, I had it open earlier so I can actually tell. It's like I mentioned that Del Close, the comedy guru,
Mm-hmm.
who really trained John Candy in Chicago before he went back to Toronto to do Second City. He had a sketch called Funeral that was about how suppressed laughter at a funeral is the funniest laugh you can get. And what does he say? There's something irresistibly funny about a funeral. In the midst of the deepest tragedy, there's always a possibility for laughter. And I think the coping mechanism of comedy, everyone, and you don't have to be a psychologist to know that that's what that's about.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that the difference is musicians always want to be funny. Most musicians I know, because they delight in the music of comedy. They hear the music of a well-placed punchline. There's timing. There's all the same things that musicians have.
Rhythm, yeah.
And I've yet to meet a comedian who didn't envy musicians because they get to do something earnest that is pure
Mm-hmm.
and isn't trying to get a laugh, and guys like Tim Heidecker do both,
Yeah.
Tim Heidecker does serious music that's not even funny. And he also can do funny music, but he can also he can do serious humor that's sometimes edgy and not necessarily laugh out loud. And I think that is the tragedy comedy face of the whole thing. Like, the two sides to the coin. And I think that, John Belushi loved playing music, and that's how the Blues Brothers happened, and Dan Aykroyd the same. And I think that I remember reading years ago that Steven Tyler of Aerosmith loved riffing with John Belushi. Like, they would just make jokes all the time, so
Mm-hmm.
you could see Tyler wanted in on the game. Dave Grohl shows up at so many comedian things, and, and I know that my brother, I'm telling tales about my brother, but my brother at Saturday Night Live would meet all these bands like Pearl Jam and stuff like that. And they would all say, they would recite sketches back to you that they watched on the tour bus because in their world,
Mm-hmm.
this was the only outlet for, shared laughter amongst the band. Though I don't know about the personal issues with the Pearl Jam, but I mean, any band that's just tired and doesn't want to talk anymore,
Yeah.
they'll put on a video, like, and so they end up learning the routines and doing the routines like I did when I was 12, or 16. And anyway, so that's something that I was wondering if you were saying. But yeah, I think definitely comedians at funerals, the darkest sense of humor, because it's a coping mechanism. I know Mark Maron talks about this on his podcast all the time. He's very plugged into, at Gary Shandling's funeral and things like that. And, when they're talking about Bob Saget's funeral, they all have memories of, well, it's so funny because the language is like, you killed, you slayed at a funeral. Like it's there's definitely a, paging Dr. Freudness to it all, I think.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting
something-
at. So you picked up on
Yeah.
it. But yeah, because I've just found like there's a slight difference, right? When you hang out with the different types of creativity. Filmmakers are different as well, right?
But I don't think they're that different. I think they're just approaching it from a different angle, but I think it's a mutual admiration.
Mhm.
And I'm a musician who writes about comedy. I also write about music, but lately I've been writing about comedy. So I'm a musician who loves music, and I read musician biographies and comedy biographies, and I spend hours not analyzing, but like picking apart and deconstructing both music and comedy.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's
It's all
my
liner
hobby.
notes to you.
It's all liner notes to me, and that's my hobby. And that's also what I bring to the podcast, talking to musicians, is I don't just interview somebody and go, hey, golly, you just made a new record. I'm like, so, when you were on the road, you must have been writing this in hotels and backstage. Like, was that hard? Like, or did you spend time in a retreat? Like, things that I know from other stories that I can actually, and then they'll tell me what their actual story is. But I find that they relax because they know that I'm speaking their language.
Mhm.
I mean, when it works.
Right. Yeah.
If somebody's also not really sure they want to talk about anything, then that's I can only do so much.
Yeah, we've all been there. If you do enough interviews, after a while, you get the yes or no guy, right? No matter what you
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah, I mean, I have had times when I actually say, so what do you want to talk about? But I don't say it like that. I go, hey, so what do you think we should be talking about right now while we're here?
Mhm.
And then that actually works. It's the emergency break, really. It's like, and I haven't really had to use it that much,
So just finishing up with that thread, but you mentioned like you were a little bit nervous talking to Chevy Chase. And when you were mentioning Chevy Chase, you mentioned the headlock story.
Yeah.
Do you want to just kind of share that? We'll end it on that.
Well, yeah. So when SCTV were starting to get critically acclaimed and getting the notice of their peers. They went to Hollywood to write one of the seasons of the TV show. So they all went, the troupe, like the writing troupe, and they all went down and they rented a house and they had a party, and they actually had several parties, but at one of these parties, Steven Spielberg shows up and he says to John Candy, "I want to put you in a movie." And John Candy just did not believe him and says, "Yeah, right. Like, of course you do. Ha, ha, ha."
Yeah.
And at the same party, or I blurred them, maybe it's not the same party, but at one of these parties, Chevy Chase came over and they're talking and for a gag, I don't know, maybe it was some kind of weird territorial thing. John, the big bear, puts Chevy Chase in a headlock, and he says, "Hey, I got you now. You're my possession now." And they're laughing, and then Chevy says, "Okay, now let go," and he goes, "No, no, no," and then John walks Chevy over to another person. "Have you met Chevy?" And he's like, "Okay, John, okay, enough of this," right? And he kind of kept it up for a little longer than anyone thought he would, and that story was told to me by several different people.
Mhm.
So when I finally got Chevy, I said, "So, everyone says that you seemed annoyed with the headlock story." And he goes, "Well, apparently I was, but I don't remember it that way. I just remember it being a funny gag that went on maybe a bit." And like, he was sort of, I paraphrased what he actually said, but his memory was much more like he saw, again, what I said, game, no game. Like, it was just a moment of two people who were making a name for themselves at a Hollywood party, sort of humanizing their relationship, and a lot of people who were there were like that too, and that's the same thing that happened when, he hung out with, when John Candy was filming in London and ends up hanging out with Graham Chapman, who wants to put him in something post Python, and, for me, the comedy nerd, to think, "Oh my God, Graham Chapman's in my story."
Mhm.
Like, I get to write about Python too, accidentally.
Yeah.
So I'm as excited as anyone when that stuff happens. And, yeah, so again, I like I said, I did not expect Chevy to be super charitable, and time has made it not seem as annoying to him. And of course, he had nothing but praise for Candy's work in National Lampoon's Vacation, which almost didn't happen. Read the book;
Mhm.
it almost didn't happen. They had
Excellent
actually
tease,
shot
yeah.
Vacation without John Candy, a whole different ending, which was way more graphic and violent.
Mhm.
And then they needed something happier, so they created a part, and then Candy. That's how Candy meets John Hughes, because
Yeah.
John Hughes was writing that. So there's a lot of cool happenstance there too, and so he just has a great memory of working with Candy at this amusement park that they filmed it at. So yeah. So again, these are people who are part of a rarefied group of comedians in a specific era of time, and they have much more respect for the fact that they were the only ones there.
Mhm. That's
So thanks.
amazing. Thank you so much for the book. It was, like you said, it was a specific era. And if you grew up in Toronto in the 80s and the 90s, even a little bit into the 2000s, there was a lot of magic. At
Yeah.
Second City, there was a lot of magic on TV. There was a lot of magic like at the movies. So it was a truly fantastic Canadian era. So I appreciate you writing the book and kind of dropping us back in there.
Well, thank you for your kind words about the book too, because we spend 3.5 years in the dark writing these things. I mean, I have lights on in the room, don't get me wrong, but
You're a
like, without
professional.
any. Yeah, well, yeah, like, I put lights on so I can see what I'm doing, for sure.
Yes.
I could show you the head injuries from the time I didn't.
Yeah.
But my point being that you don't get to socially interact with readers, and then the reaction has been, I have to say, I don't want to jinx it, but nothing but people like totally getting what I was trying to do. And
Mhm.
I've never had that happen where people are really interested in this book because everybody has a story about John Candy that they want to share, but they also want to read.
Mhm.
And then also that the people who have read it already tell me that I completed the assignment, which, again, I don't want to jinx it, but I feel really good that people have been feeling good about this thing. So that's super good, and it's a time of zeitgeist. I mean, with the Ryan and Colin Hanks film, it's like it's 75th anniversary of John Candy's birth, right? So I'd rather do that than celebrate his passing, to be honest. Um, he would have been 75, and I say should have been 75, and it's a great time to celebrate John Candy. you know?
Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where, like, as Canadians, we should be proud of it. It was a noble
Absolutely.
accomplishment. And so anything that we can do to kind of keep him alive or keep him, like you said, in the zeitgeist, in the conversation, is worth
Put
doing.
him on the money. Put him
Yeah.
on the money. That's what I say. Put him on the money and change the awards to candy awards all the time, you know? Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
By
be a
the-
little bit more like John Candy in your life.
There you go. Just a quick aside. One of the other documentaries I saw at TIFF was a Godspell documentary. Did you know about that?
No, I'd heard about it. Like, if you know anyone who has a screener, I want to see that so bad.
I want to follow up with the director. I would love to do an interview. It's called "You Had to Be There: How the Toronto Godspell Ignited the Comedy Revolution." It's what you were talking about earlier before with like SCTV and Saturday Night Live,
Yeah.
early Gilda Radner and all that. So,
and Victor Garber, all these people. Yeah. We touch on it briefly in my book because it's parenthetical to the rise of Second City, Toronto, and Martin Short and Eugene Levy, and
It was
So
another,
okay,
like, big
I want to
bang.
see that.
Yeah,
I want to see
definitely.
that. Yeah.
I don't know where that one's going to end up. At least with the John Candy doc, we know it's on Prime Video. But the Godspell one, I don't know where that's going to end up. So I'm hoping
Yes.
CBC or somebody will pick it up.
So my book's in stores October 7th, and then I guess the Prime movie comes out a few days later, and so you could literally be reading and watching at the same time, or read a bit, then turn on the TV, and then read a bit more. You can do what you want. It's really I don't give you rules about how to handle this.
You're really nice that way. I appreciate that.
I am very accommodating to the needs of the consumer. It's the Paul Myers guarantee.
There you go.
There you go. I will not knowingly tell you how to consume my work. There you go.
Yeah, you should put that on a T-shirt.
They're being printed. I would have had it on today, but they're being held up at customs. So
that's horrible.
And
you
it's
also
tough.
have a number of readings too, some really cool ones as well. We mentioned your brother Mike. You have one that's at the Strand
in New York City. Yeah, the Strand Bookstore, and we're doing one at the TIFF Lightbox, but on October 23rd in Toronto. But
with a screening.
It's also with Mike. Yeah, we're going to screen Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. But Mike and I are going to talk about John Candy and my book, and I'll be signing books there. I wish I could give you an actual website. Go to House of Anansi Publishing, and they have a site for my tour. It's House of Anansi. Anansi.
I'll
and
put it in the show
have,
notes too. Like
they have a Paul Myers book tour link, so you can do that, and you can pre-order at all the places you pre-order. I like to say go to your local independent bookstore because we love them. I love having a bookstore in my neighborhood, and I think you should too. So
that should be another T-shirt as well. Thank you, Paul, for everything.
Well, thank you.
I really do appreciate the book and like taking the time to talk and like I just love that Canadian era. Like Martin Short, Eugene Levy, Andrea Martin, Catherine O'Hara. Like it's just I was a run, man.
It was a golden time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yo, that was Paul, and his biography is called John Candy, A Life in Comedy. Highly recommended reading. If you're a comedy fan, if you grew up in Toronto when Sam the Wrecker Man was on Yonge Street, if you're a John Candy fan, you got to get this book into your life. As you heard Paul and I talking about it, like John Candy died in his sleep at the age of 43 on March 4, 1994 in Durango, Mexico, while filming Wagons East. Candy's death was a full month before Kurt Cobain died on April 5, 1994 from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. In my head, those two deaths are not a month apart. They feel like years apart. Memory is really strange. John Candy's funeral was March 9, 1994, for which they shut down Interstate 405 in Los Angeles like it was a state funeral. A couple of months later, the 405 was the same interstate as the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase on Friday, June 17, 1994. So much for watching the Knicks in the NBA Finals. And what we lost with Nirvana when Kurt Cobain took his life, we gained with Oasis. By the end of August, most of us picked up Definitely Maybe, their debut album. It's a really fun, it's a super fun Britpop album. Cigarettes and alcohol, though I don't think anybody in 1984 expected Oasis would be one of the hottest concert tickets in 2025. So I kind of get it. Like when Friends debuted on September 22, 1994, after all that, the OJ Bronco chase and Kurt Cobain and losing John Candy and like just a mess of a year. Like I can imagine some folks just wanted a comedy, goofy release. And so Friends was a hit. To quote that summer smash hit Forrest Gump, which was released on July 6, 1994, Mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. I can't do the Forrest Gumpy thing. The point I'm trying to make is that it's all connected. As I write My Pal Sammy, a weekly pop culture newsletter on Substack, that's a conclusion I continue to circle back to. It's all connected. John Candy's life, Eugene Levy, Martin Short, and more. You just heard the names and talented individuals Paul and I talked about. It's all connected. And to be connected with me, sign up for My Pal Sammy. This is the good stuff. These connections are what make pop culture so electric. Google My Pal Sammy Substack and Google will instantly connect you to me. Sign up today. I appreciate the public choice you're currently making. Thank you so much for listening to me in the Netflix world. John Candy, yo.